let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We have a
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
46.
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
As the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream. I am co-host Andrew Sullivan, joined as always by my co-host, Mr. Johnny Rickard. How are you, sir?
I'm good, co-host. How are you?
It's another beautiful, beautiful Wednesday.
Indeed.
It's mid-September. The temperatures for the first time are finally starting to dip down. It's no longer, hotter than pick your, very descriptive, adjectives. It's a good time of year. What can I say? Fall, pumpkin spice season.
Ooh.
I don't know about that. I'm an apple spice kind of guy. But.
Get your. I actually had so a friend of mine. She had a pumpkin spice chai latte the other day that I sampled, and that was pretty tasty. Nothing like a milkshake in the middle of the day.
Right. Now, is that something that you order by yourself, or only when you're with your friends?
No, you see this is what I drink. It's just black coffee. It happens to be iced today, but just black coffee for me.
Nice.
Nice. I hate the taste of things is what it comes down to. Yes, I once had, way back when I was in the military, I had a chief tell me, like, "Are you a masochist? Why do you drink black coffee?" I'm like, "Well, because carting around sugar and cream is a pain." So
that's right. So when I was in the Navy, right, I would go to sea, and all they serve is mud, and so like I just got so used to drinking that, and it's. You probably did it too, right? The tradition of never washing your coffee cup out, so it was all stained on the inside.
Oh yeah.
And it would gross so many people out that are like uninitiated. They're like, "Oh God, what is that?" And I'm like, "Flavor."
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if you're a chief warrant officer, it's part of your performance review.
It has to be. Like, yeah, the darker the cup. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. That's in case you can't find coffee. You just put hot water and let it sit for a little bit.
That's right. And my chief got pissed when they washed his cup out on the ship because they scrubbed it out on purpose, and he was upset.
Good times. All right. Well, anyways, so today's topic, as everyone can see from the title of the stream here, is Ansible for OpenShift administrators. This is one that, Johnny, you've been working on for quite a while. You've done a lot of the coordination for this one, and thank you for that. And I find this one to be really, really interesting for a number of different reasons. I feel like I say that every week. But Ansible is one of those things where I think historically a lot of us don't always recognize or don't always see how we can use these two things together.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We think of Ansible as being for managing, RHEL systems or, Windows servers or any of these other things. We have all of these other tools for doing Kubernetes management. GitOps being probably the one that comes to mind most frequently. So bringing these two worlds together, particularly for administrators, is something that's really interesting to me. I'm excited to see what Andrew and Catherine have planned for us today.
Yeah,
and with that,
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I'm just rotating. I'm just rotating windows because it's confusing me to have you and me as like crooked. So
yeah,
I'm gonna. Anyways, yeah, go ahead, Johnny. Sorry.
No, that was my fault. But no, I was gonna say it's kind of a jump from OpenShift 3, right, where it made sense to use Ansible to manage all of your clusters and stuff like that. And then once we got in OpenShift 4, it's kind of like, I don't really know how this fits, And so like there's some things that you can do, some things make sense, and then with GitOps, it's just kind of like, okay, well maybe that's not the right path anymore, but it is. I think there's a right. I don't know what the word is, right? Like we're in that sweet spot with Ansible and OpenShift right now, where I think that we're finding those uses, and especially with the AAP and the workflows that you can do with AAP and stuff like that, where it's starting to make a lot more sense to use Ansible for your cluster management, where maybe in the beginning it didn't because we didn't have the tooling yet. So.
Well, I think that was, and for those of us who've been around OpenShift for a minute, that was the big driver between OpenShift 3 and OpenShift 4, right? OpenShift 3 was an application that was installed and managed via Ansible to RHEL nodes. OpenShift 4 became like a full stack. CoreOS, and we'll talk about this in a moment when we talk about the Stig stuff. Like CoreOS is intrinsically tied to OpenShift, It's just a part of it. You can't get CoreOS, Red Hat Enterprise Linux CoreOS without OpenShift. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Anyways, I feel like we're talking around and talking about Andrew and Catherine, but we're not like we haven't actually let you all speak. So I'll hand it over to Andrew so you can introduce yourself and anything else you might have to say, and then we'll hand over to Catherine.
Thanks. So my name's Andrew Becker. I've been with Red Hat for about 8 years. So I'm familiar with that OpenShift 3 workflow that you're talking about. As like another throwback, one thing you might remember is the Ansible-based OpenShift applier before we had things like Argo CD, where you had, which was a really cool tool that was useful to a ton of customers, but maybe not the most useful thing today when you do have things like Argo CD. But as we have teed up for you, we have a lot of great things to show you about how Ansible can still be useful for things both inside and outside of your OpenShift cluster. So really excited to talk about this. Over to you, Catherine.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. My name is Catherine Yetter. I've been with Red Hat for 5 years, and can't front. I'm not an OpenShift expert like the rest of you. I am a Ansible developer, like consultant, and I've been that for 3 years now. And I really came into this trying to find a solution for Ansible developers that I saw again and again, just not having the tool set that they needed to be effective. And OpenShift has been in so many ways like a solution to so many problems that I see developers have. And I'm a convert. I'm selling OpenShift just as hard as Ansible, but I don't have those storied years of experience. I am really coming at this from seeing a use case across every client I've ever worked with and being able to find that solution using dev spaces.
All I'm hearing is that instead of the usual, all I have is a hammer. Every problem is a nail. Instead it's OpenShift is the multi-tool, right? Whether you're trying to screw in something or nail something or
Now I've got a power saw.
And talking a little bit about that tool analogy too, it's going to be, I don't know, a big thing for me is reaching for the tools you're comfortable with in certain situations, right?
Yeah.
And adding Ansible to that tool, that already like really rich OpenShift toolbox, can be really powerful. There's a question in the chat here about discussing Ansible EDA. Not the focus of this conversation, but definitely something that I'm going to bring up and discuss as one of those integration points that's really emerging at this point in time.
Yeah. And EDA is event-driven?
Yeah, that's event-driven Ansible, event-driven automation. I think you can change what that A stands for, but event-driven is the key part of that, responding to events that are going on in the world and handling them with Ansible.
Yeah, which is really cool stuff. I did a demo of it, a while ago for some executives in the Red Hat IBM world. So back when it was like just barely announced, and we had to do a little bit of fighting with it to get it to work the way we wanted. But anyways, so Johnny, what do we've got on the top of mind topics for today?
Yeah, so the big one, I think the really big one is that DISA finally, I don't want to say it like that, DISA released the STIG for OpenShift. And so if you have been working with OpenShift 4, in the last few years, and you've been trying to apply the DISA STIG, it's always been it's just been under review, and we've been waiting on DISA to release it. And so they just announced that it's out, it's official. And so go ahead and go check it out, and hopefully you can apply it and use it. But I remember when we started the DISA process, like back in OpenShift 4.2 or 4.3 or something like that, and
yeah,
it's been a long time coming. So I'm glad to see that it's finally been released.
Yeah, likewise. And this is one that we've been asked about, both you and I, Johnny, here on the stream, as well as in the product management team and the security team. Like, people have been asking about the STIG for OpenShift for a long time. So I don't know off the top of my head, and I don't remember if it says in here. I don't think it does. And so, I don't think it does. The compliance operator, and whether or not the compliance operator will have a profile for it and that type of stuff. I would have to check with that team to know for sure. But to what I was alluding to earlier, you'll also note that it includes underlying CoreOS in there as well.
Yeah.
So there's not a separate STIG that you have to apply for CoreOS. There's not a separate one that you need for RHEL. Actually, that's not true. If you have RHEL worker nodes, you would still want to use the RHEL STIG to the maximum applicability. But with this one, Red Hat Enterprise Linux CoreOS is covered underneath the part of it, which is really cool in my opinion. So I posted the link into the chat here. Looks like it got posted around. So
Yeah, if you look in the next paragraph, it talks about the compliance operator. I missed this part. It says like under administrators automatically it says compliance of both Kubernetes.
oh yeah,
It looks like it's going to be there.
there you go. There you go. So yeah, compliance operator is cool stuff. Along with the file integrity operator and all that other stuff. I was just answering a question for someone about that. Very, very timely. One of our friends over at IBM had reached out to ask if there's a DESA STIG for OpenShift literally yesterday the day after this was published. So
Good news, buddy.
yeah. Let's see. I think you had something else in the list, Johnny.
Yeah, there's two more. The next one is just a reminder that OpenShift 4.14 there's going to be some API deprecations, and it looks like it's really just going to be the storage API. It's going to go from, I think, Alpha 1 to Beta 1 or something like that. I think I actually wrote it down. I took a note. Oh, it's going to go from Beta 1 to V1. And so just keep that in mind if you're using anything that's using the storage API, which you are most likely. So it should get upgraded, but if you're doing anything outside of the the managed cluster stuff, you're going to want to keep that in mind. And then the last one is I've been calling it Dev Workspaces, I guess incorrectly the whole time. I guess it's Dev Spaces. Is that right, Andrew? I saw you like correct it, so I'm like, oh crap, I've been saying it wrong the whole time.
I don't blame you, because one of the things we're talking about is OpenShift Dev Spaces, and that's been through a rebrand recently. You might have heard of it as Code Ready Workspaces. So Dev Workspaces, you're kind of doing like a Frankenstein thing there, but I'll give you a pass.
Yeah, I'm terrible with product names anyways. Like I'm notorious for calling everything the wrong name. So, but yeah, Dev Spaces 3.8.0 just released earlier this week or maybe late last week. So a lot of cool stuff, and I know you guys had some stuff to do with that too. So I'll let you expand on that instead of me over here bumbling about it.
Yeah, the one really cool thing that I like about that's in that new release is something called kubedoc, which means that in OpenShift, in this new release of OpenShift Dev Spaces, you can run Docker or Podman commands in your dev space, this remote containerized development environment running on OpenShift, and that gets translated to like creating Kubernetes pods under the hood. So that's something really exciting that enables different developer workflows, which is something why I wanted to highlight that. And also I just like to plug Dev Spaces because both Catherine and I think it's a pretty cool piece of tech. So
yeah,
I'll take the opportunity.
Every chance, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't Podman local, or is it Pod? No, what's the thing? I think Podman can also connect to OpenShift clusters and deploy applications. The Podman GUI interface that is completely has left my brain.
I think it's just Podman Desktop. If I'm not.
Podman Desktop. There we go. Yeah. Going back to the mashups, it's OpenShift local and Podman Desktop.
Yeah, or CRC if you're Johnny.
Yeah, we've been over this, Johnny. Despite the fact that I have way more gray, you're the older one.
Dude, it's tough, man. It's tough.
I mean, you learn it once, right? And then it's in there. You're not gonna get it out.
And it's a steel trap, right? Like I don't forget a lot of things, but if you rename something, like that connection doesn't get made sometimes. So
yeah. Thank you, Khaled, for pointing out Podman Desktop. Yeah, which is a really cool tool, by the way. It also works on the Apple Silicon Macs now, which I greatly appreciate.
Fancy.
So yeah, I updated, got a new laptop. So they life cycled my laptop.
So it happens when you're big time. You become senior manager, you get the fancy hardware.
Yeah, or I've just been here long enough.
I got that, yeah.
Well, I used to have my first laptop at Red Hat because, like Catherine, I've been here just over 5 years. Was one of the i7 MacBooks. So, if I needed a space heater, it was great.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Apple Silicon is much nicer in that respect. Anyways.
I'm running a ThinkPad like P3. Sometimes it sounds like a jet plane taking off, but I still love it.
Those make for great boat anchors too, because they weigh like 8 pounds.
I'm glad it's anchored to my desk. That's all I can say.
Yep. Podman Desktop, keeping up with OS updates. Yeah, agreed, David. I very much agree. I do not use Podman Desktop as much as I probably should for doing just random things and all that other stuff. I still run a virtual machine, a RHEL, I think it's a RHEL 8 virtual machine that I use for most of my container-based stuff. But I need to migrate back to doing it on my laptop.
I use
Anyways.
Podman, but Podman machine's kind of a pain on the Mac. The machine keeps dying out. It's really like it's cool, it works, but it's like it's so a little finicky.
Yeah, but I think I mean I do think that all of this is a great tie-in to dev spaces and where all of that can fit in, because it gets you out. Like it's a great way to have an environment that is available, that is running somewhere else, that has almost unlimited resources. It's presumably deployed in a server environment or in a cloud somewhere and all that. So,
and thinking back to you made a mention of the Apple laptops with the new M series chips. Or used to be new, now it's old hat, right? But back when not a lot of software was working on that, maybe you're doing your development in dev spaces until all the tools that you use catch up, right? So it fits in there as well.
Yep. Yesterday was Apple announcement day too, so
right.
I'm sure we're all prepared to spend. I don't even want to know how much money on new iPhones, right? Anyways, so let's talk about Ansible for OpenShift administrators. Enough of us rambling.
Sounds good.
So, Andrew, I'll hand over to you and let you kind of go through, because I feel like we've already set the stage pretty well. Again, this is something that's super cool to me. So, yeah.
Sounds good. I think I'm going to kick us off with a few slides here just that we have prepared. So bear with me as we go through those.
We charge by the slide, so.
Oh, I know. I'm ready to Venmo you a few bucks, but I think it's going to set us up nicely. All right. So like we've teed up pretty nicely here, the topic that Catherine and I are really passionate about here today is Ansible for the OpenShift administrator. Just a quick intro slide for ourselves. You already heard about our background a little bit. One thing that I'll just say about why I'm pumped about talking about this is it's really an intersection of three things that I love that we've really been talking about. First is Ansible, second is OpenShift, third is that remote development environment. And a good remote development environment has been something that I've literally been chasing for about 10 years at this point, back to my last year in college when I had a ThinkPad that was 2 inches thick, bought a Chromebook and hacked together a development environment where I'd RDP into that ThinkPad and use tools like Google Cloud Shell. So come a long way with dev spaces and different alternative tools like GitHub code spaces and things like that. And just going back to the top of this conversation, it's like you're an OpenShift administrator and you have a ton of great tools. A couple that we've talked about already are security and compliance focused tools like the compliance operator, like that file integrity operator, and more things in that development or configuration lifecycle with OpenShift GitOps, Tekton for your pipelines, right? You really have a rich environment that's come a long way in the past few years to providing a great tool set on OpenShift. But there are still things outside of your cluster that you likely need to work with, right? Networking, servers, maybe old crusty databases that live outside of the cluster still that you need to administer. And when I think OpenShift, when I think of Ansible for the OpenShift admin, working with these tools that maybe aren't OpenShift or Kubernetes native yet is one of those first things that come to mind, right? And having Ansible as part of your toolbox to handle those pieces that you touch outside of the OpenShift cluster that you can automate, that you can wrangle with Ansible, I think is pretty compelling. Another reason why I think this melds really well with OpenShift is naturally Ansible has a pretty shallow learning curve, right? I'm assuming by now all of us are very familiar and comfortable and have great familiarity with writing YAML documents. And that pairs with a huge amount of integrations that come with Ansible, right? So there's certified and validated content for tools coming from Splunk, from like for F5s, I don't know, like a huge universe of integrations that you can lean on, so that when you're interacting with those tools on the outside world, you don't have to write it from scratch, and you can take advantage of certified and validated content. Speaking of that certified and validated content, that includes OpenShift, right? There's certified content out there for interacting with OpenShift and Kubernetes clusters. So really allows you to marry things outside your cluster to OpenShift itself and operators and applications you have running inside of OpenShift. We also started off talking about the good old, or depending on how you feel, the good old OpenShift 3 days. And we've come a long way with how Ansible and OpenShift integrate. One thing that's already come up in the chat is event-driven Ansible. So event-driven Ansible, as we said, is responding to alerts and events that are happening out in the world or originating from the cluster that can be consumed and then reacted to with Ansible playbooks. Alert Manager was brought up. So one thing that I've done as playing around with EDA and trying to get my feet wet is just getting like high warning and critical alerts, and maybe adding some Alert Manager extensions that aren't baked into the product. So instead of writing like a webhook server, I have a few lines of an Ansible playbook that just fires off a webhook to Google Chat or another integration that's not supported. So that's a really simple and straightforward way to start getting some value out of there. There's other Red Hat products like Red Hat ACM that has Ansible integrations where you're able to do things at various stages of the cluster lifecycle, like when the cluster is created or deleted, where there's a natural integration point there. And finally, you have these Ansible-based operators. So instead of needing to know Go to have all the goodness of operators, you can write those using Ansible playbooks, which is really cool. I cut somebody off.
No, you're good. That was, I don't know why it blipped like that. Anyways, I do want to point out that, ACM has had Ansible integration for a while, right?
Yeah.
And it comes in the form of pre and post tasks. So, if you need to do something before a cluster is created or deployed, or you need to do something afterwards, it can, those hooks exist inside of there. And there's also, I don't know, I haven't looked at it in a long time. Do Ansible operators still exist?
Yeah, like with the operator SDK, and I have some like next step links later here, but there's still a tutorial out there for developing operator-based, Ansible-based operators. Let me get that in the right order.
Yeah. So the concept there, if anybody's not familiar, is I have an Ansible playbook, and I want to stick it inside of an operator and then interact with it using the Kubernetes way. So when I want to trigger that playbook to run, effectively, I'm creating an instance of a custom resource, and hooking in, right, triggering playbook-based actions. Yeah, playbook actions based off of the operator and the CRD and the things that are happening there. I think we used to have a thing. It was like playbook to operator or playbook to Kubernetes in 5 minutes or 15 minutes or something like that. There was a bunch of stuff around it because it is pretty straightforward. I actually worked with a customer who they had a bunch of Ansible playbooks for managing their storage system. And they brought all of those into OpenShift using an operator. And then they were effectively doing things like provisioning storage resources using Kubernetes. And like that's just how they started managing, the stuff inside of there. And it was for things outside of, or things that spanned OpenShift and the outside world, if you will. So
yeah, and it's a great way to, if you already have Ansible in your toolbox, right, to extend that into Kubernetes, right? So if you haven't heard about that or haven't had the opportunity to check it out yet, I would definitely recommend taking a look at the resources we have out there to get started with that.
Yeah, and Yasser, please do ask questions. So my normal spiel, I guess, around that is, this is an office hours series of live streams on Red Hat live streaming, which means that we're here to answer any and all questions that you happen to have. So Johnny and I are OpenShift experts. We have been for a few years now, and we're part of the business unit and engineering, respectively. So feel free to ask questions about anything that comes to mind. We'll do our best to answer those. And if it's something that we can't answer off the top of our heads, which let's face it is going to be many things, we'll reach back into the appropriate folks inside of Red Hat and find those answers for you. And of course, you're also welcome to ask questions about today's topic as well. So I know between Catherine and Andrew, we have a huge amount of knowledge kind of across wide swaths of the portfolio. So we can definitely, we'll do our best to answer any questions. So Khalid, what about AWX? I'm not quite sure. I don't remember the context of that because I got distracted by my own rambling there. So
Yeah, I think that was in the context of just like the different tooling, right? So you have Ansible for Rackham and you have Ansible with OpenShift. I think he's just talking about like, well, what about AWX?
Yeah. So I'm a bit biased here, just having access to a lot of the productized features with the Ansible automation platform. I know for some of the things that we've talked about here with like Ansible-based operators, where it is a playbook running within a cluster, that doesn't really have much to do with Ansible controller or the upstream AWX. Yeah, I haven't kept up to. So what about the Ansible operator? So there's two other, and we'll get to this a little bit, and it's part of a little bit of the demo that I have lined up here. But there is also an OpenShift operator for deploying all parts of the Ansible automation platform. So your automation controller for running automation, your private automation hub for storing your automation assets, your EDA, your event-driven Ansible controller for doing your event-driven Ansible stuff in a centralized way, right? That's deployed via the AAP operator for OpenShift. I'm not sure if about the upstream equivalent there, which for the Ansible automation controller running that automation would be AWX.
got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And Catherine, I'm going to kick this over to you here because you're the one that brought the goodness of dev spaces and Ansible together to my attention. And so I want you to take that story away a little bit here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andrew. I think the thing I think about when I think about this slide is I really think Ansible and OpenShift are better together. It's the dynamic duo, the like cross-product collab that we've been missing. And I think there's so many integrations, so many which you did a great job highlighting on the previous slide, but we can have OpenShift be the platform that we run Ansible automation platform on. We can have Ansible automation platform be the tool that we use to manage our OpenShift. And I think the new development we're talking about today is that we think that OpenShift could be the best platform available for doing that Ansible development. And it allows us, using dev spaces to do our Ansible development, allows us to do a lot of things that from environments I'm coming from, like places that I'm familiar with, are really challenging. So it's making it so much easier to test that automation in OCP. I know we talked a little bit about KubeDoc earlier, but there's similar integrations we have with Molecule. We're able to spin up another pod in the dev space namespace and run our Molecule tests or Ansible playbooks against that specific pod and then spin it down. So that ephemeral test infrastructure is super hard to find, I think, in client sites and really, really valuable.
Hey, Catherine, can you just quickly kind of go over what Molecule is? I mean, I know what Molecule is, but if you want to just like give the nickel tour of what that is for those that don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So Molecule is a testing tool for Ansible playbooks. It can be pretty versatile. It can do everything from kind of linting your playbook, so just looking for those basic syntax errors that can trip you up at runtime. But it can also spin up a test environment, run your Ansible playbook against it once, and then run it against it again. That's because in Ansible land, the concept of idempotence, or being able to run the same set of commands on a machine and not change the end state is really important. So Molecule will test for that. And then you're able to write tests in that, again, that basic YAML syntax that we're all familiar with, that check to see that the test environment meets the expected conditions at the end of the run. that's my little molecule primer. Andrew, I'm not sure if you have anything you'd want to add on that.
And the one thing I'll add there is that it's part of the way that you can up-level Ansible, right? Because molecule, as you've been saying, really allows you to test Ansible content. So it moves you from writing Ansible as like one-off scripts or something like that to be more like a software development experience, right? Where you have well-tested, well-vetted automation code, which is really important when you're running that against important systems, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that point, because I think what we see a lot is folks will write a playbook maybe once for a one-off thing. And it turns out, as we all know as system admins, things that are one-off things end up being just things you need to do every 6 months or every year or every 2 years. And then by the time that they've created that, they've already put in the work, right, to make the playbook. But because it's not maintained and they don't have these tests, they don't have enough trust in that playbook for the next time that cycle comes around, 6 months, a year, 2 years, to have the confidence to just know they already have the automation take care of it. And a lot of times we'll end up developing from scratch or forgetting that they have those tools in the first place. And I think, to your point, there is kind of this shift here where Ansible kind of is taking people who are system administrators and treating them or asking them to adopt a developer mindset in a lot of ways. Like, developers make code that is their product and it's something they maintain and ensure stability of. And I think a lot of the folks I work with are more used to being in that firefighting mode. Like, oh, I'm going to solve this problem, and then I'm going to have to jump right to the next problem. I won't have time to document. And I think that making it easier to do things like testing is a great step in that direction of taking us from firefighters to like strong, stable I don't know if SA is like the word developer, but kind of people who are able to maintain automation that allows for a more stable infrastructure overall.
Yeah, we had a topic on this not too long ago. It was more of a question about like, hey, I've got this cluster, it's in this specific state. Like I think it was during the Reddit outage when their Kubernetes cluster had gone down. And Sully and I were talking about this, right? And you have all these one-off jobs over time, right? And those one-off jobs, they end up being hidden bodies in your organization. And so you've got that one person that's been there for a long time, right? You've got the Andrew Becker that's been there for 8 years that knows where all the bodies are hidden. But then Andrew leaves, and now you don't know, right? So now you've got this automation with the molecule testing, right? Because it goes beyond the Ansible Playbook syntax checker, right? And like, oh, okay, this worked, and this worked on this very specific target, but now it works on this. With molecule, you're saying, hey, I can test this on a specific scope at scale, and I know that if I run this, it's going to work no matter what. But it's also kind of giving you that map of like, hey, here's my one-off thing where, like I had to do this thing to fix this, but here's the automation that goes with it. It's tested, SCM'd and all that stuff, right? So it's really just a map to where all the bodies are, because I can tell you everything I said is that's going to be temporary. I'm probably still messing with it a year later, right? Or 2 years later. Like it is a nightmare. And so like, I hate the word temporary because it really just means I'm saying temporary to get you out of my hair, but it's going to be permanent. So.
There's no sure way to make a temporary solution permanent than just calling it temporary up front.
Exactly.
So I have a bit of a random question, because I just had this debate with some of the product managers. Are we just accepting that YAML is the default now? Like, I mean, for years it's been, Ansible is of course YAML based, Kubernetes is YAML based, but like Yasser here is asking about OpenShift virtualization. Like, is it normal for everyone now? I mean, RHEL administrators, Ansible has been a part of like the RHCE, RHCA for years now. Mm-hmm. I feel like we can just accept that YAML is a part of life as an administrator, certainly in the Red Hat world.
OpenSec is YAML.
Yeah.
I've accepted it. I mean, there's corners of it that I don't like, but I mean, I
feel like that's true of everything.
Yeah, you can say that about everything.
Let's see, we got a few questions in here. Our Hope 9, good to see you. Let's see. Licensing for OpenShift, Ansible licensing for OpenShift. How is that done?
Yeah, so for the Red Hat Ansible automation platform product, that's entitled in OpenShift the same way it's titled on VMs, and that's by a per managed node. So basically per system that you're managing with Ansible. That doesn't change as far as I'm aware.
Okay, so and that's core OS or underlying compute nodes? Does that include control plane nodes, infrastructure nodes, all of that?
So it only matters the nodes that you're managing with Ansible. So with Ansible, you have inventory files that lay out which nodes you're addressing with your automation. So if you're writing something that's running on the underlying OpenShift infrastructure, then yes, each of those would count. But if you're not addressing any nodes that are actually underlying OpenShift, it really doesn't matter the topology of your OpenShift cluster, right? Outside of the resource, from an OpenShift licensing perspective, or a subscription perspective rather, that might change depending on how many resources you need to run like the AAP operator and AAP components. But just from an Ansible entitlement perspective, it's only the hosts and systems and software that you're managing. But that's about, full disclosure, that's about the knowledge of my subscription. I usually pass that off.
Yeah, I'm the same way. People will ask me, I'm in the business unit. People ask me, oh, how much does OpenShift cost? I have no idea. I'm an employee. It's free. It's free, I should say, with air quotes there, because I'm sure it comes from somewhere. Let's see, Yasser, curious about how OpenShift aids in working with, or Ansible aids in working with OpenShift, particularly concerning virtualization.
So one thing, so that's the big scary outside world that I was talking about earlier. So I'm just going to switch tabs here real quick, because I think I have this up. Yeah. So right now I'm in the OpenShift or the Red Hat Cloud Console. So say that you're doing like a bare metal or UPI installation on VMware, and you want to use Ansible to automate spinning up those VMs. There's the certified VMware REST collection that's out there that can be used to integrate with your virtual environment, right? It's hard to talk like super generally about that, because in some of these cases where you're off the IPI path or whatever, your specifics are going to vary a lot just by definition. But that's one thing that comes to mind immediately there, is that you can use Ansible to do some of that pre-work to spin up the surrounding infrastructure, VMs, load balancers. Ansible can be great for that.
Yeah, I'll also point out, so OpenShift virtualization, right? So with OpenShift virtualization, VMs are just another YAML object. So just like you would create any other object inside of OpenShift using Ansible, you would do the exact same thing. You can also, however you create the VM, whether it's with Ansible, whether it's with a Tecton pipeline, whether it's by creating it manually by hand, you can of course connect that guest operating system in with Ansible as well and manage it that way. I think there's some, going back to what I was saying earlier with Ansible-based operators, there's some really interesting potential use cases there around, I'm now, from a Kubernetes standpoint, I'm using the Kubernetes API and custom resources to create a virtual machine, and then potentially adding it into using Ansible and an Ansible operator to manage that guest operating system and apply policies, apply configuration, stuff like that. So there's some interesting ways that you can intertwine those things together. I'm curious. I would be curious to see or know whether or not you can tie Ansible automation platform in with operators as well. So can I trigger, maybe that would be an event-driven Ansible or event-driven thing, where I can use a custom resource definition to trigger AAP to take action. But
and since we're going a little bit down the rabbit hole here, and there's one question about event-driven Ansible. Let me see if I can quickly bring this up.
Our Hope 9, you're in Tokyo. I'm only slightly envious. I've been there before, and it's wonderful.
Hey, and Becker, 2 quick shout outs, right? Jeff Poland, hey, glad that you're on, and thank you very much for helping get us all. Thank you very much for helping get this squared away and getting this online. So Jeff Poland's really the reason for the season right now. Like he hit me up and was asking about it. So glad that he was involved, and I've known Jeff for a long time. So thanks again, Jeff. And Ryan, you're supposed to be on paternity leave. Get off the internet.
So one really cool thing that I think I just brought up here, looks like my window might be lagging a little bit, but is that, this is an upstream integration for event-driven Ansible that was developed by our very own prolific Andy Block. But that ties in to listening to Kubernetes events, like having a certain object created within OpenShift, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this little snippet here, if you can't, hopefully you can see that, is just triggering based on when a config map is added, right? So EDA, event-driven Ansible, is still a really emerging thing, but with integrations like this, integrations with Alert Manager, it's a really exciting space for like expanding on things that you're talking about a bit there, Sullivan.
Yeah, I also wonder if you could do things like, I get asked semi-regularly, can we do things like, excuse me, preemptively scale a cluster?
Mm. Yeah.
And I feel like this is one of those ways where you could potentially do that, right? By setting up, with a alert manager and something over to Ansible, which would, potentially trigger something inside of OpenShift, a machine set scale up or something like that, as opposed to having cluster auto scaling, which is always going to be reactive. It doesn't take action until pods fail to schedule.
So one thing I want to pivot back to, though, and kind of like the third leg of things that I'm excited about here, is the OpenShift dev spaces part of this. And again, Catherine, I know you've spent a lot of work on just getting this to work. So can you just spend a little bit of time talking about the base of what you get with developing Ansible on OpenShift dev spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, I would love to. I think kind of the name of the game with dev spaces is that we're going to get everything that we need in a developer environment out of the box. I think Andrew likes to use the term batteries included, and I think that really kind of summarizes what this experience is. In using the operator, you have literally an easy button to get yourself all of the tools that you need as an Ansible developer. So for us, that looks like there's an extension in VS Code that Andrew's going to demonstrate, but it does text highlighting. It gives you kind of those hover overs where it's like, oh, hey, I noticed you really aren't very good at this. Like, you should try doing this or this or that. And I think that for the clients that I have that are operating maybe in Vim or the GitHub IDE, I mean, worst case scenario, but if they're in there, like it just elevates their development and it gives them a faster feedback loop. So they don't have to go through that process of like, well, I don't have a way to run this locally, so I'm going to have to push up my code to AAP to try to run it, and only to find out, within the first 5 seconds, 10 seconds, I have a syntax error. And that's, adding a minute, 2 minutes to development time, which is such a waste. Andrew, it looks like you were...
that just strikes a chord, because I've been in environments where you have to run it through the centralized system to test, and that just kills your momentum. It kills the feedback loop. So
totally. In the environment that I'm working in right now, you have to request a password to do the testing. So it's like you want to test something, but then you got to go to the password manager. You got to put in your reason for doing the test and this and this, and it's just the layers of additional work that you don't need to do for something so basic. Mm-hmm. So that I think is awesome. The next one I want to highlight, the CLI tools. So Ansible comes with a suite of things from Ansible Playbook where you can run your playbook. There's a linting tool. There's Molecule that we've touched on. I also want to highlight in the comments, Tim Apnell, who's a product manager for Ansible, put a Molecule blog post. They recently had a release, and I'd recommend reading that. And then the other one that is near and dear to my heart is Ansible Vault for encrypting passwords. In one of the clients I was at, Vault is, it's a standard practice. And I remember having this talk with a developer where they're like, I have a password and I know I shouldn't put it in GitHub, or I'm learning I shouldn't put it in GitHub. So like, where should it go? And the answer is, well, we should vault it if they don't have another password management tool. And this guy, like, he was like, I don't have anywhere to run that. I hear that this is a best practice. I want to subscribe to this best practice. And because of the way that my environment is set up, that's not an option for me. So, what else do you have? Which is, it's tough and it's frustrating. So then the last couple things, all the dependencies. So again, works out of the box, fast spin up, and those content collections. I think Andrew and I are both coming out of the public sector. I know you two have a lot of experience in the public sector. the bureaucratic red tape alone to get some of those development tools locally makes this for some people like the only option in some environments where they could get the developing tools that they needed. But even if you're not in a super locked down environment, I think one thing that Andrew, when we were talking about this yesterday, pointed out is just getting all of your versions of all of your systems to line up. Locally, it can be a huge pain in the butt. I think we all have tried managing Python packages and using that management tool. And not that we can't do it, but to be able to spin something up where you know what all the versions are going to be is like, I mean, it's chef's kiss. It's fantastic. So that being said, I think this wouldn't be a real Ask an OpenShift admin if we didn't do some sort of live demo. So Andrew, you want to walk us through what we're going to do today?
Yeah, so like we've been really harping on here, we're really passionate about dev spaces here. And thankfully, anyone I think with a Red Hat account can try OpenShift dev spaces through the developer sandbox for free. So there's this link that we can share out for the developer sandbox or Google Red Hat developer sandbox, and it'll bring you here. And it will spin up you in a OpenShift dedicated cluster where you have a project that's just based on your username. And that will dump. And then if you go to the grid icon here, you can follow this OpenShift Dev Spaces link, which will bring you into the OpenShift Dev Spaces GUI. And one thing that was released with the earlier version of Dev Spaces was this Ansible tile here that that is just a sample, a demo of what we're about to show here. It looks like we've been talking for long enough where the instance that I had spun up is needs to just get restarted. Got to conserve on those resources. Of course, a little back-end error there. What would a demo be if that wasn't the case? So let me see if I can get this started here.
Well, it doesn't help that Sullivan and I have been talking your ear off the whole time. So
Yeah.
No, it's all good. I did all I could to kind of prep this to make it go. So we get to look at the flashing loading screen here for a bit.
And I think so. There's three places that we recommend folks go. So developer sandbox is great, like as you're showing for getting hands-on, getting into an environment. You have a little bit of resources inside of there to do what you want or do what you need to do, and it is largely focused on developers. You also have learn.openshift.com, which will redirect over to some developer.redhat.com page. But there's a bunch of Katacoda, not Katacoda. It used to be Katacoda. Now it's instruct instances in there where you can go in and they're all like 10 or 15 minutes, walk through, learn different things about OpenShift. And you don't need a login at all for that. I use those all the time when I'm at conferences and stuff to give demos. And then try.openshift.com is a landing page that will help you basically find all of those things. So there's a link to the developer sandbox. There's a link to the learn. It explains how to get access via the developer entitlements. So anyone who has a Red Hat account, developer account, you have access to OpenShift and the developer entitlements, which I don't remember how many there is now. It used to be 16, and somebody said it's now much more.
I think it's still 16. I think it was a typo. There was like a release and it had like a typo that said you got like 240 or something like that, but it's still 16.
I know I should probably know this because, we did all of those changes. There's developer entitlements and then there's like team entitlements or something like that, individuals versus teams and all that. I don't know.
Yeah. So
anyways, looks like you got everything up and running there.
Yep. Just a small hiccup there because I had old stale tabs open. But the first part that I want to highlight about what you get with developing Ansible and Dev Spaces is probably the preferred IDE for developing Ansible these days. I know that the people focused on Ansible developer tools have really put a lot of work into the extensions here. So you'll notice here on the left, I have that little Ansible icon that says that extension is loaded. And this gets loaded for everybody just because of the configuration here where it calls out some key extensions here for doing Ansible development. The other thing that we have in here is like a YAML lint configuration. So as well as having versions of all your tools, like the Ansible version consistent across Ansible developers, you can also do things like enforce style with this with the shared workspace, right? So that even for your maybe less experienced Ansible developer. They're starting out with a great IDE for developing Ansible. You know they have the right tools installed, and you know they're going to be following the style that the rest of the developers or the rest of your Ansible creators have come together on. I really like the extension for a whole host of reasons. Again, going back to that less experienced Ansible developer, one thing that it gives you is the ability to just hover and discover what certain keywords mean just in the IDE. Don't have to bounce between the IDE and going to a browser or something like that. So I think that's great. The other thing that it does is if you're doing something a little silly, like you get that red squiggly of death there. So I can hover over there and see I was a little lazy with capitalization, right? So fix that, and you can tell that my style is a little bit better. Again, squiggly here saying that my spacing isn't right. It looks like I put username a little bit too close to the double curly braces there. Fix that and it's happy. Now, for those out there that might not be too familiar with Ansible, what I have open right now is called a playbook. A playbook is a YAML document that consists of one or more plays. And in this file here, this onboard user example, I have one play that basically takes in some user information, sets up a user in a Git instance that I have set up, and then creates and adds that new developer to a couple of OpenShift namespaces. Again, looking through what we have here within this playbook, we have these tasks that are basically the order of events to do those things. Each task has a module, which you can kind of think of like as a function, right? You have this Ansible URI module, which is making a request to some web service, and I'm feeding it the parameters of a URL, a user, what status code I expect, and some authorization headers, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just show, just to show that I'm not really cheating here. I have my user here. I have no projects in this OpenShift cluster I have here, and I'm also a super user, so I'm just going to do the example of onboarding myself. So I'm going to start a new terminal here. That's interesting. It doesn't look like that terminal is loading. Let me just fire that back up.
And yeah, so just to answer your question, so why hasn't AI been integrated into OpenShift like it has with Ansible Lightspeed? I think, Johnny, didn't they show something like that at the Summit keynote?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, yeah. So I think if you go back and I want to say it was day 2, and the reason why I'm questioning it is because I didn't see day 2. I want to say that there was an example of that.
Yeah, you can actually configure it here.
Yeah, so just keep an eye on that. I'm sure that we'll have more to say there and all that. So artificial intelligence, which, large language models and all the other stuff that's going on inside of there is being integrated in many different ways across the entire portfolio. So just keep an eye out.
So it doesn't see, I'm going to try this one more time, but it doesn't seem like my terminal is really agreeing with me right now, but that's fine because in true fashion, I have a little bit of backup here. I'm going to skip ahead because while you can do a lot of the development here and you can run playbooks here, like there's the Ansible Playbook command line tool that allows you to run your playbook, to run your automations. The real way, you would really want to use something like Ansible Controller to be able to put a nice user interface over it, as well as have things like RBAC, so you can give selective access to running certain automations. So you're not giving out credentials, you're just giving the access to run a certain action. So this is an Ansible controller instance that I have running within OpenShift via the AAP operator. I'm just going to launch this template, and I have a simple form here to add my user. And again, this is myself. Going to click next and launch this playbook. If I had the OpenShift console here, what you would see is a additional pod spinning up that's going to be running this Ansible job. And shortly job output should be populated here. Wow, right on cue, as I said, shortly.
Right.
It's magic.
Just like magic. And I'm going to jump back to the editor here just to focus on a few of the OpenShift components here. So I'm using this Kate's module, this Kubernetes module, where I'm showing a couple ways to interact with OpenShift here using Ansible. One is using this module where I have the definition of a namespace in that module, right? Just basic, giving it the name, the kind, all stuff you'd be familiar with in your YAML manifest. You also see me creating a role binding here for my new user, where I'm giving this person admin to that one namespace. So this is their just sandbox, giving admin access to their individual developer sandbox namespace. So again, doing it the real Ansible way of using the idempotent modules like Catherine was talking about earlier. But finally, you can also, if you're more comfortable just shelling out, and while that's not usually recommended, it could be a good first step for that person just dipping their toes in with Ansible, just translating OC commands you'd run on the command line and just putting them in a playbook so that, you have them documented in that playbook. Anybody can now run this. We also get things like logging, secrets control, right? There are benefits to just taking, as like a first step, taking those raw OC commands you might need to run as part of the onboarding process and putting them in a playbook. So you have an example of that there too, where I'm just using the OC, my OC command here directly. And if I were to go back to my OpenShift console here.
It's an interesting, sorry to interrupt you, Andrew. I know you're on a roll, but I just had a really interesting, very strange thought. So a while ago, VMware had basically a proxy that would capture API calls and turn it into PowerShell, Power CLI commands. So I wonder if you could almost do the opposite here of, can I know you're literally just running OC commands, but like, could you almost take an OC command and capture that into, a YAML object and then translate that into something that happens? But
that'd be cool.
Strange thoughts. Random thoughts by Andrew, the other Andrew.
The other.
No, something like that would be very cool.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt your flow.
No,
you're done by Friday?
Because I'm basically at the end of what I wanted to show here, right? So I started out with a user that has nothing, and there's like 10 tasks in this playbook here. I've created them a sandbox namespace where they can do their exploration within OpenShift. I've given them access to a team dev project that they didn't have before. And also, if I go into Git, so this is the source control server, I've also added them in here where they have access as a team member to the to the team's Quarkus GitHub repository, right? So going back kind of how I started off the slides with binding together things inside the cluster, your namespaces, your team's development project, and things outside your source control repository. Onboarding is one of those like really common examples where you have to meld things in the outside world with things in the OpenShift world, and Ansible can be the glue that really binds those two worlds together and makes them work harmoniously.
I also want to pull up or bring up again, which you said a lot earlier that might not have gotten, might have been overlooked, which is using the tools that you're familiar with. Right. At this point, Ansible's been around for so long, it's almost ubiquitous, in a lot of different processes. And I think that this is a really great example of not only the glue and spanning those things, but hey, I don't have to learn GitOps in order to automate things inside of OpenShift, right? I can continue to use those same tools. And, maybe I'm using ServiceNow and I go and onboard my new employee, and this is just another, playbook or, addition to that gets run to hook into all these other environments instead of, I have to have a whole separate process, a whole separate thing that gets, integrated in that. I'll also point out that you can use them together, right? There's no reason you can't, use Ansible to trigger GitOps workflows. Sorry, Johnny.
No, that's exactly. I mean, you literally took the words out of my mouth, right? Like you're not replacing anything here, right? You're enabling other tools by using a tool that's familiar with everybody, or mostly everybody. I don't want to put everybody in the category that they all know Ansible, but yeah, you're at some point, right? If you want to create a new cluster, like say in an automated way, you still have to give it an input. You still have to give it a name. You still have to say, I want this thing based off of something, right? And so I think that this is a good way to plant the seed, so that way the pipeline can start. Or it can make that, it can trigger that action and GitOps to have that whole GitOps workflow get started. So this is awesome.
Yeah. And just to harp on it again, anyone can try this with the OpenShift sample in dev spaces in the OpenShift sandbox today. So if you haven't checked it out, highly encourage you to give it a look in 15 minutes or so sometime this week. Catherine, you mentioned on the side here that you actually have the terminal working. Do you want to take the screen share and show the people that we're not all bluster here?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because I just made sure.
Awesome.
Okay, I think, let me know if that kind of works. I know I didn't test with mine, but I'm in that same space. Oh, you can't see it.
We're not seeing your screen.
There's so many little buttons.
There we go.
Okay, how's that? So I've got similar little syntax thing, but here, just for my Ansible people out there, we want to show we have Ansible going. We got Ansible lints. I don't know what more really. What would you like to see here? I think the terminal is a really cool feature, and being able to run playbooks in here, just showing that off.
Well, I kind of want to poke at and highlight, so this is running inside of the dev space environment, which means that, one, I'm not an everyday Ansible user. So I don't have to worry about, getting Ansible set up and running on whatever system I'm using, whatever modules I need, other plugins, right? All of this other stuff. I don't have to worry about an IDE. I don't have to worry about, I'm old school using Vim to edit playbooks, right? I have all of these tools in a browser window, including the ability to run those playbooks directly from within there, as you said, to do testing, to even run them, if they end up being, the infamous, it was temporary, or, this isn't production, this is test. It'll never go to production. So I really do appreciate, and I just want to make sure that we reinforce, like, everything is here. I don't have to, I was talking about getting a new laptop. I'm looking at my laptop like you all know what I'm looking at. I got a new laptop, a month or two ago, and, I don't have to worry about setting everything back up again.
Yeah, one thing I think about with this too is, as a consultant, I start up on new projects semi-regularly, and every team has that like dusty Word doc with the, copy and paste this into here, and then spin around 3 times and wave your wand and like spit and hope that it works. And this, especially because it's centralized, means that if everyone on your team is using it, it's always staying up to date with what your team needs. And so when you bring someone on board, you don't have to dust off that Word doc or double check anything. It's like they're going to be entering the same development environment that every other member of that team is using, and verifying regularly is effective for what they're doing.
Yeah.
So do you know, and this isn't, I don't mean to put you guys on the spot here, but like if with like, the AWS modules, is Boto 3 included as like when you run the install or the Ansible dev space, is Boto 3 and like those libraries included with that, or do you have to import those as a separate task and then use them?
So Johnny, we're in the containerized world at this point here. So what we've seen with doing this with customers is that, and can you open up the dev file here, because that's kind of like where the magic is, Catherine. Is that right now we're using this creator image as like the seed for this containerized workspace. So what for each like Ansible project or repository that you have, you could base off this currently community upstream creator EE and layer in those validated and support and certified collections with those other dependencies. And you would have that new base container image that has those those additional dependencies for the work that you're doing baked in, right? And
Nice.
then this would spin up, and dev spaces would spin up that container with, and then add on the IDE components on top, right? So in that way, it's really nice too, because let's say you're developing for a certain task, you get it to like that 80% stage, you don't have to touch it for a bit. Instead of like, oh man, I have to update Bodo on my laptop and reinstall this collection at a new version right here. Hopefully you have some workflows already to update dependencies within containers. And so you're automatically able to spin up that dev space and waste no time with reconfiguring your laptop to pick up work you were doing 2 months ago. So that's another nice thing about using this environment.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We think so too, Johnny. Yeah.
That's awesome.
We love this.
You're talking about dusting off the Word doc. I'm just sitting there imagining like you got the old binder, you open it up, you flip it through the pages back in the day.
Standard operating procedure. Johnny.
That's right. We used roll paper back in the day, 100
Yes,
years
yes,
ago.
we did. I can't tell you how many of those things I wrote. Yeah.
And just as like another like next step that I know both Catherine and I have in our minds as well, what comes after this, right? Is again, along that journey is like the Ansible creator, that Ansible developer as a software engineer, maybe start taking a look at other services that you have on OpenShift, like pipelines like Tekton, right?
Mm-hmm.
To do things like building those execution environment container images, doing things like writing your own collections and publishing them, right? Seeing where you can take those tools that are established parts of the software development lifecycle and established software development tooling and applying them to Ansible use cases. So I think there's a lot more exciting things we can do with things that already exist out there in the OpenShift sphere.
Yeah, one of the things that I was brainstorming a while ago was, not everyone uses Cloud Init for their virtual machines. And so, if you think OpenShift virtualization, I can use like a pipeline to build a new template image, for my virtual machine, template disks for my virtual machines. Well, I can use that plus Ansible, and now I can use the tools that I already have, right? I don't have to translate everything into Cloud Init. I don't have to redo any of my automation. Basically, I use Ansible in order to build all of those images and a pipeline to recreate that or repopulate that disk inside of OpenShift virtualization. And now I have my entire environment updated however in accordance with whatever policies or automation I have on other platforms as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a ton of different ways that I think that the two things can work together. Ignoring what you said before, which is interacting with the outside world, the scary outside world, which is certainly a core use case and something that I think will be very, very familiar and very popular.
Yeah. The other thing that we haven't talked much about yet, because we have our OpenShift admin hats on, is that this same platform is useful for people that might not otherwise touch OpenShift in their day-to-day work, right? And like we were talking about earlier, Ansible has a ton of integrations from like servers to networking, right? And if those people that traditionally manage those systems are going to find use cases in a whole bunch of other Ansible modules, right? They will find this DevSpaces-based development environment really useful too. So it's another way that you can really bring like OpenShift goodness to a lot more people that you might interact with that normally wouldn't touch the thing, right? It's useful for a really broad swath of technologists within an organization.
Yeah, that feels like we can wrap up our slides because I think the last two are really speaking specifically that, oh my gosh, now you guys have seen all my speaker notes. But I don't even need to tell you what I'm going to say. But yeah, I feel like we've touched on this. These are like the drive home pluses for us, are the consistency across the dev environment, that ease of onboarding we were just talking about. And then we didn't talk too much about testing, but ephemeral test infrastructure and kind of aiding that transition from just SA to SA creator and developer. And then what I think Andrew was starting to allude to is this idea that, yes, this is great for OpenShift, but also, yes, this is great for many teams in any organization. And what I'm seeing when I go to different clients is that because there historically hasn't been a good option or way to spin up a developer space, every single team will have their own homegrown solution. And each one of those teams spends however long working to get tooling approved, getting that versioning correct, typing up that SOP, like doing all of those steps and all of that overhead. When if we are able to create like we're calling them creation environments, like creator hubs. But if we're able to create like this standardized set, we can take away that overhead from teams that are just looking to get started with Ansible, and really kind of minimizing that barrier to entry for getting around, kind of kicking around the wheels and trying it out for themselves. And we have a couple what's next. I think Andrew has done a great job plugging, but checking this out for yourself. I think the developer sandbox is something I found during this process, and it's so slick. It's free, it's there. All you need is that Red Hat sign-in to go in and get to do everything that we're doing after this. Andrew's, I think we were going to publish the code that we use in the demo. I don't know if we still want to do that, but if you want to go try that out.
I can put my simple GitHub link out in the world too. I can put that out there.
And we'll take the slides and we'll post them onto SpeakerDeck and
Excellent.
update the YouTube descriptions and all that other stuff, so there'll be a link to those.
Yep.
So fear not for anyone who's watching. We'll make sure all the resources are available. Our Hope 9 talking about how back in the day people used punch cards. I was actually thinking about the evolution of technology the other day. So my son, who's my oldest, he was born the same year that the first iPhone was released, right? 2007. So you think back in his not quite 16 years, like we've gone from, flip phones that, we used to play, Snake on and stuff like that to, the modern, basically supercomputers that we carry around in our pockets. And, what's it going to be like in the next 16 years? I was thinking about that in the context of, I'm going to be that old guy who's, like continuing to bang away on my, glass slate in my hand instead of using the brain phone that all the kids are using or whatever.
The Neuralink. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm not a Facebook person. I haven't used Facebook in a very long time. So a friend of mine was giving me a hard time. Like, you work with technology, like you do all of these really cool things and amazing things, and you don't know how to use Facebook. And I'm like, well, that's my parents' thing,
Yeah.
Anyways, so this has been really great. I've learned a number of things, and I've seen some really cool things that I was aware of to a degree, like dev spaces and how we can utilize Ansible playbooks and hook all those things together. I think, AAP running on the same OpenShift cluster as dev spaces and being able to manage everything as a single package, like that's just really awesome. I really love that. So thank you all. Thank you both for coming on and talking about this. For our audience, we're kind of wrapping up now. So if you have any questions, anything that comes to mind, feel free to post that into chat. If you're not watching us live, if you're watching the recording or anything, feel free to reach out. So you can reach out to me. I'm pretty easy to reach, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. Or at Practical Andrew on all of the various social platforms. I fully admit, though, that I am not frequently on the artist formerly known as Twitter very much anymore. So apologies if I miss any alerts, messages, etc. on there. But Reddit and Slack and all of the other places, you can find me on there. And you can reach Johnny at Johnny, JONNY, at redhat.com, as well as JRockTX1 on all of the various platforms. I always make a plug for two different Slack teams. One is OpenShift Commons. So OpenShift Commons, if you're not familiar with it, is the OpenShift community. So it's a great place to go and meet all of the different people in all of the different things that's happening with OpenShift. And then we, of course, have the OpenShift users Slack channel. So this is part of the Kubernetes Slack team. And you can go there. It's, I don't know, like 4,000 of our closest friends, Johnny.
Yep.
So there's a great community there. Lots of stuff around OpenShift, around OKD, around all of the other things that are related and tangential to it. So I definitely recommend that everyone go there. And of course, Johnny and I are on there too, along with, there's a bunch of engineering folks, product management
Mhm.
folks. There's a bunch of folks on there. It's pretty easy to find us. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, X, Twitter, yeah. Are posts on X still called tweets though?
I don't think they're called X's. That can't be right.
Yeah, that'd be weird. Yeah.
What's that country song? All my exes live in Texas. You know. Does dev spaces include tilt?
I'm not familiar with Tilt.
I'm not either.
If it can be installed via a package manager, you can likely bake it into that container image.
Yeah.
So really building that developer environment is something you can greatly customize. So very, very flexible.
Our Hope 9, I'm stealing that from now on.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I've seen a lot more people using Mastodon lately. I don't know. Maybe we should consider that one, Johnny.
Yeah, I just want to do it so I can say I tooted, I tooted the message out this weekend or something like that.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, because Mastodon posts are called toots, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, thank you again to our audience. We really appreciate it. Again, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, anything that you'd like to ask us. Andrew.sullivan@redhat.com or Johnny, JONNY at redhat.com. With that being said, Andrew, Catherine, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been super insightful, and we've really, really had a good time with y'all. Really appreciate the conversation. If you all have, or Johnny, I guess I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah. So again, Andrew, Catherine, thank you very much. Jeff Pullen, I know you're out there. Thank you for setting this up. I really appreciate it. We'd love to have you guys come back. Just real quick on the schedule. So next week we're still trying to figure out what we're going to talk about, but we'll post it. On the 27th we have Ortwin coming back for service mesh and all things service mesh, and then October is going to be just packed in full of like security topics. So all of October is booked out, which is pretty incredible, honestly. Like we're going to have a lot of good topics coming up. So looking forward to it. Again, thank you guys for coming on, and this was an outstanding presentation. So really appreciate your time.
And
thank you guys. It was great.
Yeah, thanks. This is awesome.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick, Johnny. So Christopher Greed asked about data science and dev spaces. I'm sure it's possible, but I don't know if it's the right tool considering OpenShift AI and the on-prem, right, where which used to be called Red Hat OpenShift Data Science. So it has, all of the stuff that you need to run. Why are the words escaping my brain? They're not playbooks, but
yeah, notebooks.
Notebooks. Thank you.
Yep.
And all of those resources that are in there. So definitely check out. It's probably easier to search for Red Hat OpenShift Data Science than OpenShift AI, which is going to turn back a whole lot of noise around like running AI workloads and all that other stuff. So, but yeah, that would be the probably the better suited tool for data science on OpenShift.
Yeah, and we had an episode just recently. I think it was 103. It was in the early 100s where we had somebody from the data science team come on. Robert came on, and he talked about roads.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you in 7 days.